So mine's working, yours is working. Let's look at this one last time, because as I look at this event handler, it's really nice, but it's also, the event handler is running code instead of running functions. Remember, I like the idea of event handlers running functions and let the functions run the code. So I actually think that we ought to turn both of these into their own functions. The purpose of one is going to be to do the video routing, and the purpose of the other one is going to be to do the debugging, because I really like the idea of us getting told what the debugging outputs are. So let's do this. Let's convert both of these into functions, because once we do that, we're going to reuse those functions. Because one of the things you might remember is coming down the line are some automations. We're going to want to be able to connect the HDMI and not just turn on the televisions, but also route video. We have code that routes video, but it's all embedded in the event handler. If we functionize the routing video, then we can reuse that code for the list box, but also for where we're going with those automations. So let's write two functions. We are going to write function func video debugger, and it's going to tell us specifically debugging information about the video switching that takes place. And we are going to want it to tell us a couple of things, because remember, we could get video switches from a couple of different places. We could get video switches from list out 1, from list out 2, from the NV32 itself, as well as from connecting those HDMIs. So let's put in some arguments. We're going to put in arg who did it. We're going to put in arg input, and also it might be nice to say arg why. Why did this happen? What's going on? Okay, and because we opened that chunk of code, we're going to close it, and let's do this. Let's make it print, and this is a place where we could take a couple of different routes. We could simply concatenate everything together, and in a lot of respects, that's actually pretty easy. But I also really want to keep in your ideas the idea of, you could use string.format. And you could write a general formatted string like this. You could say, instead of passing in a number like we did in the lighting controller, we also could just pass in a string. %s. %s routed %s slash %s, because we're going to include both the friendly name and the pretty name for what got routed, because of, guess what, %s. And then what are our arguments that we're going to pass in? What's that first %s? The first %s is who did it, arg who. The second argument is going to be what was routed, arg input. The third is going to be the translation of that, which is table babelfish bracket arg input. And then lastly, why did it happen, arg why. And so if we come down to our event handler, we can systematically replace that print with func video debugger. And we are going to pass in all of our things. What are the things that we are going to pass in? All right, we need to pass in arg who did it. So who did it is going to be list out concatenated with the I. By the way, if you weren't paying attention, we're doing that naughty coercion thing, aren't we? We are concatenating in a number, which we really probably should be doing concatenation of toString of I. but it works, and it keeps us from having to write toString. And I really have to believe in my heart of hearts, that's why Roberto did it, because he's like, come on, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine, and most of the time it's fine. For those of us who know a lot of Lua, it is fine, and we just do it all the time. For those of us who have like long-standing histories with other languages, guarantee you're going to be putting in toString, and that's okay as well. All right, so who did it? List out ... I did it in this case. Next argument, what was the input? The input is actually ctl.string. And why did it happen? In this case, it happened because of user interaction, right? We actually poked a button. All right, so that means I can comment out the print and instead use func video debugger. Okay, cool. Well, let's see if it works. Oh, line 171, I forgot a closing. All right, let's see if this works. There it is, boom, and boom, and boom. Yeah, that's nice. And it is giving me really clear feedback. List out when routed Nate's laptop /HDMI1 because of user interaction. This is great. So our debugging function, perfecto. Cool. Now let's also write function func video switch. All right, and let's pass in, we need to know the output number. So arg outnum. We also need to know the arg input string. So input stir. We are going to write a function that is going to take in which output number and then which input string do you want. So because we opened it, we're going to close it. And what are we going to do? We are going to largely, we're going to take this line of code that we had down here, and we'll paste it up here, and we will beat it into shape. So instead of I, right, because we're no longer in a loop, we're in a function call, I here is going to be the output number. So we're going to replace I with the output number. And what string are we going to look up in table Babelfish? The one we pass in. So we're going to pass in the string that we are looking for. So there's that. So now down here in our code, we can run func video switch. And what are we going to pass in? So we need to pass in the output number. That's just I. And we also need to pass in the input string, which we will translate inside the function. So what do we need to pass in? Simply ctl.string. So now let's comment out that code. So now our event handler is running two functions. This is exactly the state that we wanted to be in. So now when I hit save and I poke all the buttons, I get working code. So both of our functions are totally working exactly the way we want it. This is fantastic. But this is really only half the battle, because while we are telling the NV32 what to do, we want to hear back from the NV32 so that we can have real bidirectional feedback. And we will pick that up in the next section. See you in a minute.